Welcome back in, everyone, to the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. The other day, we did the first three of our 2021-2022 NBA previews, talking about what we think the three probably bottom teams are in the NBA. We talked about the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Houston Rockets, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. But now it's time to turn our attention to the Eastern Conference, Sap. And we got three teams we're going to talk about on the show today: the Detroit Pistons, the Orlando Magic, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's start off with the team that had the first overall pick this past year, Sap, the Detroit Pistons. They are projected for 25 and a half wins. They picked Cade Cunningham out of Oklahoma State, a guy that seemed to be universally accepted as the consensus number one pick. A guy I know we both like a lot. We seem to like a lot of rookies in this class. Tell me a little bit about Detroit, Sap.
Yeah, I mean, again, Cade Cunningham, the first pick of the draft, is someone I think you're slightly higher on him than I am. Although he is a player that feels like a force multiplier because he does everything on the basketball court. He's a good defender, good distributor of the basketball, plays with a very high IQ. He just carries himself as someone who's older than his age, which always impresses me. But I think he's going to be a real star in this league, but not necessarily a guy who's going to be a highlight real type guy, right? Like I think Jalen Suggs or Jalen Green or anybody else we can find in the draft named Jalen are going to be more explosive type players. But Cunningham seems to have a very high basketball IQ. You got Sadiq Bey, who's a nice player, Jeremy Grant, and I'm a big fan of Troy Weaver, the general manager. I think he's a very aggressive, smart general manager. So I think they're really headed in the right direction. And again, Cunningham, he seems to be a guy who's going to take over the leadership role of the team right away, which is impressive as a rookie. And I also think that, we're going to talk about the Orlando Magic in a little bit as well. I think Jalen Suggs kind of fits that as well, like really mature rookies who feel that they can be the face of the franchise and that they can produce. And that's impressive to have. Sometimes you get a rookie who just isn't ready for that. But I think Cade Cunningham's ready to be the man.
Yeah, our friend Kendrick Perkins compared him to LeBron, which is an unfair comparison for anybody. But it's sort of the concept is that he does everything on the basketball court, right? Not somebody who's gonna be LeBron James and go to 10 finals and win multiple MVPs. I mean, he could win multiple MVPs. He is the first pick for crying out loud. But it's not fair to compare anybody to Jordan or LeBron or those all-time greats when you're coming right out of 1 year of college. Just unreasonable. Mm-hmm. But what Perkins was saying there is that he's a guy who does everything on the basketball court. He can rebound, he can pass, he can score, he can shoot, he can play defense. He's a jack of all trades sort of guy. He's got the prototypical build you would want for a player in this modern NBA. Tall, strong. He's athletic enough to slash, but he can guard multiple positions. So everything that you want if you're designing what a basketball player should look like is what Cade Cunningham looks like. And the rest of their roster, it's really not bad. Now, they weren't a good team at all last year. There's a reason why they ended up with the number one pick. But like you were saying with Troy Weaver, I think they've done a good job. They got Jeremy Grant last year, who played very well for them on a bargain of a contract. He put up really good numbers and is a very solid pro, and they're paying him well below market value. They did a good job in the draft last year. You mentioned Sadiq Bey. He had a very nice rookie year, as did the kid from Washington, Isaiah Stewart. Another solid rookie year for them. And they also, this year, I liked what they did in the draft, not just at one, taking Cade Cunningham, but Luka Garza out of Iowa is a guy that was an All-American, I think 2 or 3 years. He's big and slow, but he shoots threes at a really good clip, and he plays hard. And he's somebody who was a second-round pick who I think could be a good NBA player. They added Kelly Olynyk in the offseason, solid NBA veteran. And there's also the guy they took highly last year, too. They took 3 rookies last year, Sap, and Killian Hayes, a point guard out of Australia, who I think they're high on as well. So there's some players on this roster to be excited about. Another guy, I don't know if you know who this is, Sap, or anybody does, but another guy that I really like is Hamadou Diallo. brother of former NBA player Cheek Diallo, a guy who's crazy athletic, and he's putting up he put up pretty good numbers in the especially in the advanced stat categories and the per 38-minute stuff. I think he's really raw, but another guy that can contribute. I think if you go through the roster, Sap, it's chock full of guys who are pretty interesting and have a lot of potential. Will that lead to wins this year? No. Like I said in the last podcast, Sap, young players don't contribute to winning basketball games. That's just a fact of life in the NBA. Even LeBron James and Michael Jordan didn't find success early in their careers in terms of win totals. It just doesn't happen. But I do like the way this roster is being built. I think that they did very well in the draft for themselves last year. I think they did very well for themselves in the draft this year. And that's how you build a team from the ground up, right? Is you hit on your draft picks. If you're picking high, you hit on your draft picks. And otherwise, you're stuck in no man's land.
Yeah, no, you've got to hit it, especially when for the first time in franchise history, you have the first pick in the draft. So you go out and you take Cade Cunningham, who I think compares favorably to a former Piston, Grant Hill. He's a better shooter than Grant Hill was, not quite the athlete Grant Hill was, but the same type of player in terms of that he is kind of a Swiss Army knife. He can do it all. I think Cade Cunningham is going to be a 20-point per game scorer, maybe not as a rookie, but eventually he'll be in the 22, 23 points per game range, but also will give you 7, 8 rebounds, 7, 8 assists, play good defense, be a good leader, and make those around him better. That's a really good basketball player, right? If you get that out of someone for a period of time, you've nailed it with the first pick in the draft. So, and again, Troy Weaver's someone who's put a lot of time into this league, knows the league well, paid his dues, and now he's in charge of that operation. I think they're in good hands.
Yeah, and I think, with Cunningham, he was a very safe number one pick. Not saying that that's a bad thing. He was the consensus number one. I would have taken him number one too. I think the floor on him is very high, which is what you would want. If you're picking one, you don't get a crack at it that often, I guess, unless you're the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Orlando Magic, who seem to constantly pick there. But you want to make sure that what you're investing in and getting the franchise and the fans excited about is a guy who isn't going to just completely flame out a la Anthony Bennett, a couple of years ago.
Right.
You can't afford that. It's a franchise killer. And with Cade Cunningham, if he doesn't end up being the best player in this draft, he's guaranteed, I think, to end up being at least one of the top 3 players. It's just his ceiling, his floor is very, very high. Because he does all those things.
He's a mature guy. That's the other thing that we can see from him. He just carries himself as someone who's much older, and that's impressive. It's almost like when you draft a quarterback in the NFL and you look and say, this kid is really mature. You could put the franchise in his hands. I'm a big fan of Justin Fields, who finally has been named the starter with the Bears. I just like him. I think he carries himself really well. He seems mature beyond years. You look at that in a quarterback, you look at that in a franchise player in the NBA. So yeah, he's a safe pick. I mean, if he doesn't turn out to be as great as we're talking about, he's still going to be a really good basketball player. And I do stand corrected. The Pistons did have the number 1 pick in 1970, and they took Bob Lanier.
That's a good pick.
Yeah, that was a great pick. That was a great draft, by the way, because in that draft also was Dave Cowens. The Celtics ended up with Dave Cowens, and I believe Jeff Petrie came a little bit later in the first round, and Cowens and Petrie, I believe, were co-rookies of the year. But Bob Lanier was the first pick in 1970, and here we are 51 years later. The Pistons finally get the first overall pick, and I think they're going to nail it with Cade Cunningham. He's just going to be a really good pro who can do everything on the basketball court, and someone that's a good guy to build around because of his maturity and his versatility.
Yeah, and he's somebody who wanted to be there and actively, campaigned to be in Detroit, which I think is, what the city's been lacking. They have a great basketball history, great basketball culture there. They have great fans, but the team's just been irrelevant since the Chauncey Billups sort of days, which, was now a long time ago. And so he gives a big shot in the arm to the basketball culture there in Detroit. And the NBA is more fun when the Pistons are relevant. Will they be this year? Probably not. But I do think that they're trending upwards. And because they have this influx of good young talent, like those guys I mentioned, Cunningham, Bay, Stewart, Diallo, Hayes, and a solid veteran in Grant, I think that they could be in 2-3 years time. They really could be in the playoff mix without any real hesitancy. I feel confident saying that. And from there, if Cunningham ends up being a star, then, you attract other stars and who knows what happens. But I think of the teams that we've talked about so far, I do think that this team has been organically built the best. It's only been really 2 years or a year and a half, but I think Weaver's done a good job building this team sort of from the ground up.
Yeah, kind of building it somewhat like an NFL franchise where, you make sure that you build the offensive line, the secondary. And now with Cunningham, you've got what you think is your franchise quarterback. So now the pieces should be able to fit. But I think the future is bright there in Detroit.
Yeah. So, and we were saying, what's the most likely award that a player on each team could win? To me, it's obvious for this one. I'm sure you agree. Rookie of the Year for Cade Cunningham seems to be the only logical award anybody on that team could win.
Without question, he's right there with Jalen Suggs and Jalen Green, even Evan Mobley. I mean, I think those are the 4 guys who were 4 of the top 5 picks who were considered the front runners to be Rookie of the Year.
Yeah. All right. So that's Detroit, a team that I think will be very fun this year. And I think they'll lose a lot of close games. And that's how you sort of start building is you lose close, then you win close, then you win big. So I think they're on that step of it. I think they'll give teams a hard time because they're young. They'll have a lot of energy. And I don't think they're going to fear anybody because they don't really know anybody. So they'll play hard. I think they'll be a pain in the ass team to play. Not going to result in a ton of wins, but I think they'll be very entertaining to watch. All right, Sap, let's move on to the Orlando Magic, another team that had a very high draft pick this year. They picked 5th overall. They took Jalen Suggs, a guy I know you like a lot, out of Gonzaga. They're projected for 24 wins. They have completely retooled as well last year at the trade deadline, getting rid of Nikola Vucevic and Evan Fournier. They're 2 best players. Vucevic for a long time had been their best player. They sent him to Chicago. Fournier went to the Celtics and now is on the Knicks. What do you think about the Magic this year?
Well, I love Jalen Suggs. I mean, I talked about him throughout the tournament last year. He reminds me a lot of Jason Kidd. Now, maybe I'm being hyperbolic here because I'm comparing Cade Cunningham to Grant Hill, and I'm comparing Jalen Suggs to, I haven't mentioned who, but people are saying he could be Kobe Bryant for all we know. And now I'm comparing Jalen Suggs to Jason Kidd. That would be a pretty high ceiling for him. But I love his leadership ability. He plays great defense. Again, he was a football player. He was the Mr. Football in Minnesota and was recruited to play quarterback at Alabama. So the leadership ability, the understanding of how a team works, the toughness, he's got all of that. Not a really great shooter right now, but he does appear to be a guy who's going to work his ass off to get good at that. So I'm very high on him. The rest of the roster, I mean, Jonathan Isaac is a talented guy, but he's had some injury concerns, and at other times, I mean, how invested is he? So
probably the most outspokenly religious player in the NBA,
right?
Take that for what you will.
Which is great. No, I have no issue with that. But sometimes, like I don't think Michael Jordan was very religious. So like basketball was a big thing for him. So like maybe Jonathan
the religion
Isaac,
of basketball,
the
yes,
religion of basketball,
yeah.
and the casino. He loved the casino. That's where he worshipped. But yeah, I mean, Jonathan Isaac's a different kind of guy, but he's a talented kid. So we'll see what they'll be able to do here. I do think Suggs is going to be really good, but he's going to need scorers around him. He's not natural scorer. He's a guy who I think is going to be a 14, 15 point per game guy just because of his athletic ability and his desire, but he's going to be a guy that also will get you 7-8 assists. I think he'll rebound really well for the position, play good defense. So he's going to need some. I don't think he has them obviously right now.
Yeah, here's what they have. This is a good problem to have. They have a glut of young, talented point guards.
Mm-hmm.
They have Suggs, who really fell into their laps at 5. Wasn't supposed to be there, fell into their laps at 5. Then they have their first round pick last year, Cole Anthony, son of Greg Anthony, who I think had moments where he looked really good as a rookie and was very highly touted recruit coming out of North Carolina. And they have the former number 1 overall pick, Markelle Fultz, who before he got hurt last year was finally looking like a quality NBA player. So they have 3 guys who are interesting at the point guard position. Again, not a bad problem to have, especially for a team that's expectations are super low. You could find out which of those guys, really stands out. That being said, you only have so many minutes to allot to guys on the court, right? So somebody in of those three is going to be the odd man out. Now it's easy to start the season. I believe Fultz is still hurt, so you have Suggs and Cole Anthony, not a problem. In addition to that, they have a couple other young guys that I like. I like RJ Hampton, who they got in a trade from Denver last year. He was a guy who skipped college to do the pro, I think, in Australia. Struggled at times last year, but towards the end of last season was starting to put up 20-point games. Crazy high recruit, crazy good athlete, somebody who is either going to be a really good NBA player or flame out of the league completely. There's going to be no in between with him. Another guy who looks like, based off of the one preseason game I saw of them when they played the Celtics, looks like maybe he's going to figure it out too. Mo Bamba, very high pick a couple years ago, has not done anything noteworthy in the NBA, but I don't know if you watched the Celtics preseason game the other night, Sap, when they played the Magic. He looked like, at times, the best player on the court for Orlando. He was hitting jumpers. He was hitting threes, blocking shots, playing well in the post. This is a guy that people were really high on. He was, I think, the 5th overall pick, Sap, in the draft, a really high pick. And he hasn't done anything yet in the NBA. So this is the year for Mo Bamba. If he's an NBA player, he'll show it this year. If not, he might be out of the league. So they got guys on this roster that are interesting. Terrence Ross, a solid veteran player. Etuan Moore, another solid veteran player. Robin Lopez is somehow on this team, a solid veteran player. You mentioned Jonathan Isaac. They have an interesting roster. Is it a roster that's going to be competitive for the playoffs? Definitely not. But, depending on Suggs and how some of these other young pieces fit in with some of the veteran players, they could look, the future could look bright for them. I don't know how good Suggs can be to a point where he's the guy you build a team around. Because, back when you compared him a little bit to Jason Kidd, when Jason Kidd was in his prime, you could sort of build a team around a non-shooting point guard.
Right. No, you need to score now.
I don't think that works now.
You pretty much have to be an elite scorer. And by the way, when Jason Kidd was with Dallas, he had Jimmy Jackson and Jamal Mashburn, teammates. I mean, that was a big three then. Everyone thought that was going to be the team that was going to dominate the 90s, and they had some personality issues with someone was fooling around with someone's girlfriend. I mean, they were all young kids, so they didn't get it quite then, but they were really talented. Jalen Suggs doesn't have anybody close to Jimmy Jackson or Jamal Mashburn. No. So that's my point, is they're going to have to get some scores for him. No, I don't know if he'll be a guy that ever averages 20 points per game. Jason Kidd didn't. I mean, but the league was different back then. It almost feels like, and I love cross sports references. I'm sorry. I know people get turned off by them. I absolutely love them, but it's a different sport now than it was 25 years ago. It's like you can't win a Super Bowl without an elite quarterback.
Right.
You need your best player to be a guy who can go out and drop 25 a night or close to that.
I really believe that.
Yeah, no, you do. I mean, look at the teams. I mean, we're talking about Brooklyn winning the championship, not because of their defensive acumen or their great rebounding ability. They have 3 dudes that can go out and get 50 on any given night, right? So that scares the hell out of you. Jalen Suggs is not that kind of player. Yeah, I kind of wish that Jalen Suggs went to a team that was kind of ready-made to contend, or at least be a playoff team that had some scorers for him to work with. That's not the case here. So I don't want to see him get into some bad habits where he thinks he's going to have to go out and score. I don't think he has that makeup. I think he's an incredibly aggressive, tremendous leader, but I think he understands that he's going to need to help get the guys to score and be a really good team, rather than him going out and just trying to blow it open. Like Jalen Green's at the different end of the spectrum. I think Jalen Green may go out and average 25 a night, and Jalen Suggs might be a 15 point per game scorer, and they're both doing what they're really good at.
What do you think of Fultz?
Well, I mean, when he came out of Washington, he was compared to Russell Westbrook, right? Like this uber athletic point guard.
Russell Westbrook who could shoot. That's what they said.
Shoot better, right? He was even a better shooter. I always held back on him because, look, to me, if a guy is that good, his college team should be better than 7-20. And he was playing in the Pac-12, and I know this might alienate you. It's not the greatest conference. It's a good conference, but it's not
nice.
quite that, not the SEC or the Big Ten. But nonetheless, he was a great player in the Pac-12, and his team was 7-20. It was like that with Ben Simmons. That was my biggest thing with Ben Simmons. Like, he goes to LSU and doesn't even make the tournament. Like, could you just picture, like, Kevin Durant did get Texas to the second round of the tournament, right? I mean, we've talked about this a million times. If LeBron James couldn't have gone right to the NBA and went to, say, Ohio State, they probably would have won the national championship, or at least made the Final Four.
In my mind, I have no doubt that would have happened.
Yeah, well, because he, whether it was high school or his first year in the league or his like 19th year in the league, he's the most incredibly consistent superstar. His high school numbers aren't much different than his pro numbers.
No, I saw what he was as a rookie in the NBA. You know, that would have translated to winning the national
college. Yeah,
they could have thrown him on any team. It would have been like Larry Bird on Indiana State. You know, if you threw him on that type of team. Yeah,
he could have went to Harvard and, you know,
I agree,
had them in the Final Four. Yeah, so it's the same type of thing, because the dude would have scored 27, had 8 rebounds and 8 assists, like, as a collegian. He's done that in the pros. He did that in high school. Like, that's what he is. So Fultz, that's the only thing I'm hesitant about. But now the injuries and the yips, and it seems like he's kind of got that back a little bit, right? Like, he's kind of got that shot to be.
I thought he was playing well before he got hurt.
He was playing well, yeah. I mean, and then the yips continued on to the free throw line, which for point guard, that's a disaster. I mean, we see that with Ben Simmons, right? We've seen that with even Russell Westbrook the last few years, who's become a 64% free throw shooter. Your point guard can't be a 64% free throw shooter or a 34% shooter in the playoffs, which is what Ben Simmons was last year. You point guard has to be an 80% free throw shooter, so that's an issue there. But, you know, he's worth a gamble because he's marvelously talented, and it's a great story. Who the hell's not rooting for him, right? You know,
do you like Cole Anthony?
I do, but I think he's going to be better as a third guard. Like, I think he'd be a perfect guy who could play a little bit of the point, a little bit off the ball, you know, be a real, almost like his dad. I mean, his dad was that type of player. He was never really a star, but he was a really good, useful player. I think that's what Cole Anthony can be. I obviously, Suggs should be the starting point guard. Maybe they play alongside each other in the backcourt, or you have, you know, Cole Anthony, because I'm a big fan of having that third guard who can handle both of those positions. Your guy, Marcus Smart, can do that. You can have Marcus Smart handle the point, you know, defend the elite scorers that maybe are a little bit bigger, you know, have that versatile type of game. And I think Cole Anthony, maybe not to the degree as Marcus Smart, he can be a versatile player like that. So he'd be a nice guy as your first guard off the bench.
Here's where I like Orlando right now is I think they could be a really good defensive team, because I know Suggs can play defense. I think Jonathan Isaac has the potential to be an elite level defender because he's incredibly long and athletic. I question his potential as a scorer because I haven't seen any sort of shot, and he's a twig. I mean, obviously Kevin Durant's a twig, but that, you know, that's a one of one. Right. So I think that they can be really good defensively. I think Fultz has shown that he's going to be decent defensively too. But between the anchors of Suggs and Isaac, I think that's two guys who have potential to be, you know, all NBA level defenders. So I think that's what they have to sort of build their identity around to start. Now, if they want to be competitive going forward, they're going to have to find a scorer, obviously. That's not so easy, because I agree with you, Seth. I don't know what Jalen Suggs' ceiling is as a scorer. I would think it tops out at around 20 a game max. That's not to say he won't be a really good player, because some other really good players don't score 20 a game. I think he'll do a lot on the court in terms of defense, leadership, assists. He'll probably be a good rebounding guard too. But they're going to need to find somebody that can put the ball in the basket all game long, and he can't do that. You know, there's not a lot of point guards who can do that. You know, there's a reason why Damian Lillard and Steph Curry have been on the top of that mountain peak for a long time, because there's not a ton of point guards who can score 30 a game, no problem. They just, when you're the smallest guy on the court, it's hard.
Chris Paul's an all-time great player, came close to winning a championship last year, but Chris Paul's not an elite scorer. I mean, he was in his 4th, 5th, 6th year in the league when you make a case he was the best point guard in the league, right? I mean, pretty handily. He was a consistent MVP candidate. He could put up 22 points per game. Now, as an older player, he's a 16, 17 points per game scorer. Yeah, there's not a lot of guys who could play the point and go out and score. Like we said, Lillard, Curry, Kyrie, Harden, if whichever one you want to call a point guard, Isaiah Thomas, obviously in the day with the Pistons, was able to do that. But then after his team got good, he didn't have to, because he was more of a facilitator. When they needed him to score, he could score. He still would lead the team in scoring. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. And you could, I think you're nailing it, Jet, and saying you may see some lower scoring games with Orlando, because they'll give you effort, play defense, but they may not be able to score. So there'll be nights out there where you'll see 92-88 type games. But at least you're building something there with the defensive end of the court with the likes of Isaac and of course Jalen Suggs, who I think is got a chance to be a real, kind of a quarterback out there defensively. So yeah, that could be a team that, again, on any given night, they're going to be a pain in the ass, because they'll D up, which not every team in the NBA does on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. To have a clear identity as a young team, I think is a good thing. Saying we're a defense first team. I think that's a good thing. They're going to need to find a score. Maybe it is RJ Hampton, because he was showing some flashes of it, but if that's the case, he's a ways away from being a guy you can rely on to score consistently. Sure. And I know if you're a Magic fan and listening, they also had another high first round pick. They took Franz Wagner, brother of Mo Wagner, out of Michigan. I am not high on him at all.
Me neither.
He's a role player in the NBA at best, similar to his brother, a little bit better. But I don't think he's a pillar of what they're going to do going forward in Orlando. So I just don't have that much to say about him, frankly.
I'm not very high on him either.
All right, Sap. So that's the Magic. And let's go ahead and take a look at our third and final team from the East today. The Cleveland Cavaliers, former home of your favorite player, LeBron James. They are projected at 28.5 wins. They have a very, very interesting backcourt, and that's sort of the identity of their team. They call it Sexland there in Cleveland. Colin Sexton, Darius Garland combined for Sexland. They just signed Jarrett Allen, who they got from the Nets, to a big extension in the offseason. And they're a team that has never found any sort of identity when LeBron James hasn't been on the roster, post, I guess, since LeBron came into the league. Sap, is there reason for any optimism in Cleveland these days?
I like this roster. Again, Garland and Sexton, I've often felt that they could become a really good backcourt, not an elite backcourt. They're not going to be Steph and Clay or Dame Lillard and CJ McCollum. Absolutely not. Or Chris Paul and Devin Booker. They're not going to get to that level, but they can be a good backcourt, an athletic backcourt that can also score the basket. So we'll see how that develops. I like Evan Mobley. I think he's going to be very similar to Chris Bosh. Again, we're making all these comparisons to rookies. I mean, if these guys turn out to be as good as I think they're going to be and are as good as the comps I'm putting out there, then this is going to be a great draft, right? Because we're talking about Jason Kidd and Chris Bosh and
bunch of Hall of Famers. Yeah.
All Hall of Famers. Absolutely. Cade Cunningham's going to be LeBron James and Jalen Suggs is going to be Kobe Bryant. So this should be a really good draft if that happens. But Mobley does have a lot of similarities to Chris Bosh, guy who's essentially 7 feet tall, but can face the basket, can shoot from distance, is a good defender. Again, a slight guy, but when you're 19, 20, you start to fill out and get stronger with better nutrition and working out and all of those types of things. So I think Mobley is going to be really nice. And Jarrett Allen's a nice piece. I really believe that. Good defensive player, energy guy. And they still got Kevin Love in, I think he can still play, but aren't they going to try to move him at some point? Now
unmovable.
Unmovable because he's got this massive contract and he doesn't want to be bought out.
Right.
So
and he's not good and he's not good anymore.
He's not good anymore. Right. So, I mean, what exactly does he add unless, he fills a role on the team as a 3-point shooter and Sexton and Garland can get him some easy looks potentially. But it's not a bad roster though, because I think you've got that backcourt. And Mobley, I think, is going to be really good. And I think Jarrett Allen's a real high energy guy. I mean, I'm sure the Brooklyn Nets wish they still had Jarrett Allen. He would be perfect on that team, right? But again, it doesn't seem to fit. It's got some talent, but I don't know how it all works out.
Yeah, I questioned the roster building here. They had an offseason where they made moves, but they seem like I don't really get it. They added Lauri Markkanen. They did a sign and trade to the Bulls. He seems redundant with Love and Mobley. They added Ricky Rubio, who I think is a good veteran player, but why is he on that team? it doesn't really make sense. You know, you have the 2 young guards. Why you're adding Ricky Rubio to the mix on a team that, you know, should just trying to play young players on it. I don't really
Unless
get
they
that
want to
either.
move one of the young guards, because Sexton obviously is due for a contract.
Yes,
So
he is.
maybe they try to move him, and some team out there looks and says that Colin Sexton can be, you know, a really nice piece for us. That could be something. And now Ricky Rubio's your starting point guard. But yeah, it does seem like it's a weird roster construction.
Yeah, I like Mobley too. Here's what I'm going to say about him. If I'm Cleveland, I try to bring him along slowly. I don't think they should force him to be a 3-point shooter really early in his career.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, we know it's important for bigs to hit threes now. I think he has the ability to do it. But I also think that when you get into the NBA, the 3-point line's a little bit longer. The defense is closed out a little faster. He was the tallest guy in college. He's not going to be the tallest guy in the NBA, so people can block his shot now. If you start missing a lot of threes early in your career, you can get really discouraged with it too.
Mm-hmm.
I think play to his strengths, let him use his athleticism in the post, let him pick and pop a little bit, and try to do it. I mean, Chris Bosh wasn't really a 3-point shooter for most of his career.
No.
And, you know, let him get confident in things he knows he can do, and then move him out to the 3-point line. I'm worried that Cleveland, since they have shown no ability to really, you know, be competent at all other than when LeBron's on their team, that they could potentially just ruin him early by saying, stand in the corner and shoot threes. I just don't think that's a good thing for a young player.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because again, if he becomes a 28% 3-point shooter, then he's going to get shy taking 3-pointers. And again, you can develop by taking 3-point shots, but you don't want to become just totally reliant on that. So you want that mid-range game, which I think he can have a nice mid-range game, which Chris Bosh had and got him into the Hall of Fame. You know, 17, 18 footer, you pick and pop with Sexton, Garland, Rubio. So that can be interesting. They do have a nice roster of talent, but again, I'm not sure how it all fits. I think of the 3 teams that we're talking about today, they probably will have the best season of the 3 teams, because they've got some veteran players that are decent, and Sexton and Garland, and obviously Jared Allen, and if Kevin Love contributes anything. So they're not as reliant on a rookie like say Orlando and Detroit are. So they could, you know, pull off you know, close to the high 20s, low 30s in wins based on that talent. But, you know, they're not sure where they're going from here.
Yeah, a guy they took early in the first round the year prior, Isaac Okoro. He's a player that's really a defensive minded player. I like him. I think he's a good guy to have in your starting lineup. Maybe could be like a Jay Crowder type. And we saw how effective Jay Crowder was for the Suns last year in the playoffs, but not, you know, somebody who's going to be a star, but a guy who does sort of the dirty work, which every good team eventually needs that type of guy. So I like him as a defensive player. Yeah, PJ Tucker.
Taking one shot a night. I mean, Jay Crowder obviously can score more and is not afraid to take it. But yeah, that guy that does a lot of the dirty work, that you go, okay, this is your night to check so-and-so. He's 30 on you, but make him work his ass off to do it.
Where does Markkanen fit in on this team?
I was always high on him when he came out of college, and he's had some really good games with the Bulls. But yeah, it seems to be redundant with Love, and Mobley, I think, can give you more than Markkanen on the defensive end, but he just hasn't developed. It's like he came in as a rookie, was good, and he remains good, but nothing.
Right. He never taken a step.
Never got better. Year. Yeah, it's almost. I mean, is he kind of maybe a slightly better version of Kelly Olynyk? And I know it. You know, just can't compare white guys to other white guys, but you know, that type of player who can shoot from the outside, isn't a real top-notch defender or rebounder, kind of perceived as somewhat soft, and you know, a guy that's going to kind of float around the league forever because he's useful enough to have, but never good enough that you want to keep for a long period of time.
Yeah, his field goal percentage has dropped every year he's played in the NBA. And his 3-point percentage was his best at his rookie year. He shot 40%, which is excellent. And then 34, 36, 36. You know, he's supposed to be, you know, came in as a tall 3-point specialist. And that's kind of about all he can do right now. You know, they gave him a decent sized contract. He didn't want to play in Chicago anymore. So, you know, Chicago sent him to Cleveland, but I guess maybe the better question is why did Cleveland want him? Like, yeah, where does he fit in on this specific team?
Yeah, it's almost like, okay, he seems good. We've played him 5 times a year because the Bulls and Cavaliers, you know, match up 5 times a year, and like he burned us a couple games, so let's add him to the team and maybe he can offer something. Yeah, he just seems to be a guy that's just there. like he could come off the bench and be your 7th or 8th guy. And look, it could maybe carve out a niche and help the team, but I just don't get the feel that he's gotten any better. Just another guy, I don't know if he loves basketball. That's the other thing too. Like you see certain guys that are dogs that are going to work their ass off, get better, improve their games. Maybe he's just a guy who, and look, some of the European players have been criticized for this, that they just kind of go through the motions. They're finesse players, and they make a nice living, and they're not going to do any heavy lifting. Maybe he's one of those guys.
Yeah, I think, but the starting lineup, if it's going to be Sexton, Garland, Okoro, Jared Allen, and then maybe start Evan Mobley, I mean, that's a pretty solid starting lineup.
Bad. Yeah, it's not bad, because I like that backcourt.
I think a lot of people like Sexton. He's a clearly good scorer. He's one of the fastest players in the league. I mean, he puts up 20 points a game regularly. He can put up 30 or 40. He's done it before. Garland's a guy who I think some people are a little bit even more high on than Sexton, even though he hasn't quite shown it yet. But coming out of Vanderbilt, he was talked about as a guy who has a lot of skill, and he showed flashes of it last year. So yeah, it's an interesting backcourt. We'll have to see. Their team that seems primed to make a trade, because we've heard a lot of rumors about them being in for Ben Simmons. They want a star player there. So we'll see if one of those guys we talked about gets moved. It would probably be Sexton. Like you mentioned, Sap is in line for a big contract extension, so he seems the most likely to be moved because they're not they're cheap, basically, is what I'm saying.
Oh yeah.
So we'll see what happens with them. But so the 28.5, Sap, do you have them over that?
I think they may eke over that again because they have good talent and players that are right in their prime, like Sexton, Garland. Jared Allen, I'm a big fan of because I think he's a high energy guy. And maybe Jared Allen rubs off on Markkanen, and Markkanen plays with a little bit more passion and emotion. And I think they can maybe eke over that.
Their biggest addition, Sap, I didn't even mention this in the offseason, Taco Fall.
There you go. Literally the biggest acquisition. Yeah. I mean, and Taco, unlike Kyrie Irving, who has no impact on winning, we know that Taco has an incredible.
Yes, he does. His plus 48-minute stats are outstanding. Could he ever play 48 minutes of the game? No, he could not. But no. If you look at them,
48 seconds maybe.
He's averaging about in a full length NBA game, his stats would average to about 20 points, 20 rebounds, and 20 blocks, which is really good. I don't know if you knew that, Sap.
That's really good. I mean, that's like Will Chamberlain used to do that in the first half, I'm sure. But Taco, I'm not sure if Taco played 48 minutes in a season, but if you extrapolate that out, he's pretty good. But I think Cleveland could eke up 30, 32 wins.
All right. Well, we'll see what the season holds for the Cavaliers, but that's going to do it for our preview of those three, what we think are the bottom three teams in the Eastern Conference. Again, the Cavs, the Magic, and the Detroit Pistons. And we will be continuing to do these previews up until the start of the NBA season. So make sure you keep listening. All the teams will be covered. So if you're a fan of one particular team, we will get to you. Don't you worry about it. And it's probably a good thing if you're still a fan, because that means your team isn't going to be one of the worst teams in the league. So, the longer you wait to hear the show about your team, probably the better your team is. So we are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage. If you want to find out any more information about the podcast or our opinions or polls or whatever, follow us on social media at JohnSap25. That's the number 2 and the number 5 at Jet Stryer. And you can find our podcast wherever podcasts are found. Just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. And you can find us on YouTube too, if you're not already, youtube.com/JetStryer. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you later. See ya.